Is it recording? It didn't say anything.
It said recording.
Oh, it did? Okay, it didn't say it for me. Okay, perfect. Well, we've got 50 people starting to join us. I'm sure there'll be more coming in, but we might get started because I know everyone has a busy afternoon. So, hello, welcome everyone. I hope you've had a great week so far. You had a lovely Thursday. Really appreciate you joining us on this webinar. We've got some awesome speakers, and yeah, we're also really excited to hear what everyone has to say, and we really love these moments we can bring everyone together across the country. My name is Yolanda. I am the CEO of Divers for Climate. I've also got Sarah from the team with me here, and Kim somewhere in the background, and we're just going to be managing this session to make sure everything flows well and there's no technical issues. But really, this session is not so much about us, but about our amazing speakers who are going to be sharing some of their experiences from down on the front lines down in South Australia, down in Whyalla, with updates on what I'm sure everyone is concerned about, the current cuttlefish season, and what has happened down there since the algal bloom, which has been going on for more than a year now. The reason we've put this on is because we've been getting a lot of questions that we don't know how to answer. So we thought the best thing we can do is bring everyone together and have a really open chat about things that we all love and things that we're all concerned about. So with that, before I continue, just want to acknowledge the lands that we're all dialing in from today. I want to acknowledge this event is part of Adelaide Climate Action Week, which is on the lands of the Kaurna people. I'm personally dialing in from Gimoi Wallabarri Dingi country all the way up in far north Queensland. But it'd be really great to know, everyone, if you could put in the chat where you are dialing in from, just so we also know what kind of solidarity we have with South Australia at the moment. It's really good for us to know who's joining in and from where. So if you want to pop in the chat your name, where you're from, that's really cool for us to know who's joining in these kind of events. Just some really quick housekeeping. Because everyone has the ability to use their microphone and camera in this session, and we will use that when we do Q&A because we want this to be a community forum. But just while people are speaking, if you could keep your microphones muted, that would be great. If you don't, we will do it for you. And use the chat box however you like for questions, comments. We do encourage everyone to be kind and respectful. This is a friendly space, so please do keep that in mind when you are writing things. We will have designated question time, so please do either put your questions in the chat or save them when we do have that space for asking questions, and we'll come around to you. And that is pretty much all the housekeeping. Can see people going in the chat. Everyone's from everywhere. That's awesome. Really quickly, if you haven't heard of Divers for Climate, we're a national organisation that focuses on bringing the dive community together for climate change. We know our oceans are changing, and we know that divers are on the front lines. We found last year that 9 in 10 divers say they've experienced a changing ocean firsthand. That's most divers that you'll meet, and I'm sure that number is going higher. We know that last year was a bit of a tough year for our oceans. We know that with the ongoing algal bloom in South Australia, we've had simultaneous coral bleaching events, we've had the kelp forest in Tasmania starting to feel the effects of marine heat waves. It's been a pretty rough time, and we are feeling those impacts in lots of ways, whether it's through mental health, whether it's through impacts on business, whether it's through just connection to the ocean. Divers are really impacted firsthand. But we already know that. So we just wanted to kind of frame that as that this session is not so much about, it's not always about all the sadness and the negative things that we see, although we really do feel that and we don't dismiss those feelings. We do want to face reality, but we also want to look forward. We also want to look at solutions. We want to look at what the future of diving looks like, particularly in Australia. Our vision at Divers for Climate is a climate resilient dive community in a thriving ocean. And that means we all need to be prepared for what's happening. We need to know how to respond, and we need to know how to listen to those who are experiencing it firsthand. So with that is all my speaking done. We are going to pass it on to our speakers, which Sarah is going to introduce.
Cool. So, hi everyone. As you can see, we have 4 different speakers joining us this evening. Our first 2 are dive operators from South Australia. So first off, we've got Many Cats from Dive and Airlab to give us a bit of a rundown on the cuttlefish season. Then we're going to have a quick Q&A. If anyone has any cuttlefish related questions, that's a good time because Manny has to run to another event. Following that, we'll have Ron Vandermerel from Diving Adelaide to touch on the wider implications of the bloom for the industry. And we're going to do another Q&A after that because Ron also has to run off to another event. They're highly sought after, Ron and Manny. After that, we'll have Professor Bronwyn Galanders from Adelaide University speaking to offer a bit of a science perspective. And then lastly, we've got Kirsty Bevan from Conservation Council SA to give us a bit of a policy rundown. Yeah, so Manny, the stage is yours whenever you're ready.
Thanks, team. Appreciate the platform and thanks everyone for showing up today. Really appreciate your time and effort to be here. Today we're calling in from beautiful Barngarla country along the Cuttlefish coast, and I am just going to share my screen now so you can see what we've been getting up to. Let's see, that's the one. All right, bear with me for just a sec. Here we go. All right. So yeah, it's been a weird season for us for the past few months to say the least. Um, and yeah, so like Sarah said, my name is Manny. I'm the director of Air Lab and the recent owner of the Whyalla dive shop. This is my second season, essentially running the giant Australian cuttlefish aggregation. Today, I'm also joined by Brian Aruda. We're going to be hearing from Brian. He's one of our lead researchers at Air Lab, which we'll get into in a minute. So as most of you probably know, the aggregation hasn't really happened this year. There's been incredibly low numbers, only a few dozen cuttlefish really showing up along the entire 8 kilometers of coastline where they normally aggregate. And in response to this, the state government has implemented a 90-day temporary ban on engaging and interacting with the marine environments along the protected part of the coastline. And that happened that was about the end of June, beginning of July. This happened. And we were asked shortly after that happened to partake in some surveys to count the eggs of the giant Australian cuttlefish. And just for a bit of context about the aggregation, normally we have tens of thousands of these giant Australian cuttlefish aggregating here. And they have a really short lifespan. They only live for about 12 to 18 months. And so it's really critical that that they reproduce, because essentially the success of one reproductive season will inevitably determine the population for following years. So we went out on July 7th and 8th, just at the beginning of this month, and a team of 4 divers, including myself, Brian, and 2 others, conducted 8 surveys along the entire coastline. And each of the dives was about 1 hour. It was just over an hour in length. And
Oh, I think someone has just
Sorry,
muted Manny.
I muted you. Sorry.
that's okay. So essentially what happened? Yeah. Yeah. So we did a bunch of dives and checked out a bunch of different sites, and we saw very few cuttlefish and not a whole lot of eggs. We only saw about 44 cuttlefish amongst the entire team. We found about 25 clutches, and those are individual groupings of eggs. And we counted right about 400 eggs, which is really concerning, considering that these eggs, they would have, there would be a mortality rate. Not all of the eggs or the hatchlings will survive to adulthood. So what does this mean for the future? We don't know. I'm relatively confident that next season is going to look pretty similar, unfortunately. We'll be going back out and monitoring, and we'll go out and do more of these surveys for next year. We'll be in the water for sure. But it's definitely a major point of concern. And as far as what we're seeing when it comes to the actual cuttlefish and the eggs themselves, we've got a bit of a video here. The cuttlefish that are here, they're not out and about. They're hiding. As you can see, they're hanging out under rocks, under ledges. There's lots of predators around. There's lots of snapper hanging out, and so they're not wanting to be out and about. We are seeing pairs though in some of the rock ledges, and we are seeing eggs, which is, I guess, gives us a bit of hope. And hopefully we undercounted. I hope and pray that we undercounted. But yeah, it's concerning. This is what we're seeing, and yeah, we're just gonna have to keep monitoring to really understand what's going on. And so just as far as these sorry, just had somebody come in. Just as far as the surveys, this is the first time that this method has been completed. DEW, Department of Environment and Water, had us go out and do this. We're also putting together a bit of a research paper. We're compiling data to assess various factors that are impacting the cuttlefish ecosystem dynamics. And we're using PIRSA, which we're using PIRSA's data. The PIRSA is the primary industries and regions of South Australia. They manage all agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing activities in the state. And they've been doing surveys for the past 30 odd years, since 1998. So we're really relying on their data sets to understand what's happening when it comes to the aggregation and its future. And so what I'll do now is I'm going to pass over to Brian Aruda, who will continue to, I guess, go into depth about the research that we're conducting.
Yeah, so as Manny said, we got the chance to work with DEW, Department of Environment and Water, doing a different kind of survey this year, looking at cuttlefish egg abundance on top of cuttlefish abundance, which PIRSA used to manage until there was a marine heritage listing in 2024. It got some funding, and the reins got handed over to Department of Environment and Water to do multiple surveys during the cuttlefish season, which has been very helpful, establishing the bell curve of arrival of the cuttlefish aggregation and seeing the peak aggregation in June, July months, and then seeing it taper off July, August in a typical year. In terms of our side, the citizen science side, we've been trying to work with the government to get our hands on some of this data. So PIRSA and SARDI, so South Australian Research and Development Institute, is an arm of PIRSA. They have some data on cuttlefish, on snapper. The cuttlefish is about 20 some odd years out of the 26 years in the 21st century, but there's some years missing. And with the snapper stock assessment reports, there's only been 5 in the past 15 years released. So there's a bit of a gap in the data that the public have access to. And what we've been trying to do is fight for a bit more data transparency. These are government entities that are publicly funded with taxpayer dollars. And being a environmentally responsible dive operator, kind of taking the reins for kind of promoting responsible tourism within the cuttlefish aggregation season. Like, it's very important that we get our hands on this data to understand the ecosystem dynamics of this very charismatic and very sensitive species. So we filed this FOI request, and we're waiting a response. That's going to kind of lead into some of our data collection for our paper. And then, yeah, so in terms of kind of broad level overview of the impacts, obviously the algal bloom is what's catching a lot of people's attention. The Great Southern Reef has very high rates of endemism. Some of these species are found nowhere else, and some of them have very complex neurological and musculoskeletal systems that are very sensitive to the brevetoxins of the algal bloom. And recently, it's originally the Karenia species was to blame, and specifically Karenia micimoitoi, which has been reassessed, and now scientists and researchers believe Karenia cristata was the main driver of mortality, broad marine mortality. There was over 550 species recorded to be impacted to that extreme level across South Australia alone. And this algal bloom doesn't come out of nowhere. So algal blooms across the world, they're kind of like cyclones and other natural events. They happen, but this is the first time that it's happened in this region of South Australia, and it's the third time in recorded history that Karenia cristata was the main kind of lead brevetoxin in the harmful algal bloom event. And we know with rising sea temperatures and prolonged sea temperature these marine heat waves have an outsized effect on kind of catalyzing nutrient loads and higher nutrient loads in the water that can potentially bring on and exacerbate these algal bloom events. And in terms of, the other side, the more direct human side would be fisheries management. So these are two species that are very important in the Upper Spencer Gulf. We have the cuttlefish and we have the snapper, which is a big, both recreational and commercial fishery, which has been closed since 2019. You can see the collapse on the map. But you can see there's a lack of data, right? There's only 5 data points for that snapper spawning biomass. And we have enough data to fully look into the relationship between these two species. They have a very important predator-prey dynamic. We believe the carrying capacity of cuttlefish in this area is about 300,000. You can see not one year in the past 15 years have the cuttlefish reached that carrying capacity. And historically, the reason there was a very prolific snapper fishery here was because there was very high snapper abundance due to high food availability, the cuttlefish being one of those primary food sources. And so it's very important that we understand how these two, and the cuttlefish, remember, used to be a managed fishery as well. So understanding how these species are interacting. And for us, right, the cuttlefish visit us in the Cuttlefish coastline for 3 months of the year. There's very little that we know about where exactly this northern subspecies of giant Australian cuttlefish hang out the other 9 months of the year. And they, as hatchlings, they're so small, we can't just put a tracker on them, say like a shark, and do acoustic tagging and things. So it's up to scientists and researchers to increase funding and increase research effort to kind of answer some of these really important fisheries management questions.
Yeah, and I guess, talking about fisheries and I guess, broader ecological or broader economic impacts, when we look historically at where funding has gone into management, research, and monitoring for species like snapper, the past few years, there's been about $8.8 million. And in recent years for cuttlefish, it's been about $1.25 million. And a big percentage of that funding that's gone into cuttlefish management and research has been ad hoc emergency spending. So post-environmental crisis in 2013 when the populations collapsed, and then again just last year when the algal bloom was kicking off, and the state government was wanted to invest in I guess more so for the cuttlefish, a proactive measure to try to prevent cuttlefish egg mortalities. So thankfully, the bubble curtain that didn't need to get turned on. That was an investment to protect cuttlefish eggs if the algal bloom were to come up to the cuttlefish coastline. But the eggs successfully hatched out last year. Pretty high likelihood, though, that those hatchlings then swam off into algal bloom impacted waters later on. And so we can see, the snapper get about 4 times as much investment compared to cuttlefish, yet cuttlefish generate about 4 times as much revenue when it comes to the economy. Prior to the snapper fishery closing, the snapper fishery generated about $5.2 million, whereas in 2019, it was reported by the Whyalla Council, it was in their figures in their report, that tourism brought in over $20 million. And cuttlefish was a really big part of that. So I guess when it comes to that, when it comes to today and projected revenue loss, if we were to compare, hypothetically speaking, and these figures, these are all made up, I guess, except for the 2019 numbers. Right, 2019, we know that $21.2 million was generated for Whyalla. And when it comes to the cuttlefish industry, what at least our business, and keep in mind we don't make nearly this much, but our business, we've been seeing about a 10% growth year on year when it comes to our bookings. And so if Whyalla were to have that same growth rate as far as their industry, we could generally estimate that Whyalla probably lost out on about $41 million this year alone. So it's pretty significant when it comes to the loss and the lack of investment in comparison. So I guess, what's next? What needs to happen? Um, we need more baseline data. We need more research. We need transparency when it comes to the data that has been collected in the past. Um, we need more funding. Of course, everyone needs more funding for research. Yeah, the universities need more funding. Citizen science groups need more funding. Um, and yeah, I think more infrastructure around doing monitoring, doing research is going to be really critical. So, um, yeah, if anybody has any questions about any of that, I think that's pretty much everything that we've got for the meantime.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Manny and Brian. That was super informative and really interesting. I think answered a lot of questions that I had about cuttlefish. We'll do like two or three questions, and I know you guys have got to run off. But we'll just, is that okay? Check in the
Yeah,
chat.
it's absolutely okay.
If anyone in the audience watching now is your time, you can either pop your question in the chat, or you can pop your hand up if you want to speak and ask Manny and Brian a question. Just let us know. Otherwise, there's one in the chat already. So really interesting. You've got the snapper fishery that's so heavily invested in versus cuttlefish, which is clearly more economically meaningful. Like, why do you think it is? Why I feel like as a diver, it's quite obvious to us, like why would invest in something as amazing as the cuttlefish, but what kind of is the barrier there?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to a fishery, we got to keep in mind the recreational fishing community in South Australia is huge. It's estimated that about 30% of all South Australians actively fish, right? And so from a dollar like a return on investment, the that money would get a really good return on investment because it would be impacting a lot of fishers in the state, which is is such a reasonable response as well. But when you look at, I guess, the dollar for dollar comparison, yeah, I guess it is a bit skewed.
Yeah, rough. Thank you. And I know you showed kind of like there's been various seasons, like there's been varied seasons before. Is this kind of the slowest that you've seen happen? Like, how different is this from previous seasons which haven't been as expected?
Yeah, so this is by far the lowest abundance that we've had on record in recorded history, which is scary. In 2013, there was also really low numbers. I think it was estimated that there's a few thousand. And I guess one of the things that we can hold out hope for is that the populations have recovered from incredibly low numbers. Um, it's just one of those things that with surmounting pressures, environmental pressures, climate change, how what is going to be the recovery capacity for the cuttlefish? That's something that we don't 100% know. So it's complicated. We're just trying to figure it out. We don't have all the answers. It's a learning process for us as well. So I'm not going to pretend like we know everything because we certainly don't. That's why we're doing this research and trying to answer these questions.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you guys are doing so much and answering so many questions for I think a lot of us. And just
Mm.
then quickly, I think there's going to be a lot more questions that come in that are going to be quite technical. But just wanting to know from you guys, I guess being on I guess there's a lot of divers around the country that wanted to come down this year, myself included. I mean, our whole team included.
Yeah, I'd
And
also I'd like to personally apologize to each and every one of you who I've potentially canceled on this
oh,
year. I'm
I
really
don't.
sorry. Yeah,
I
it's
think
it's brutal.
everyone
Yeah.
understands. But I guess I wanted to ask you, there's a lot of divers who, obviously would have loved to have come down and helped
Mm.
out, but who are wanting to know what can they do? Like, what's the best way we can support you folk at the moment? Knowing that it's a bit hard to come down and have a season like we all wanted to, what's the best way for people to help?
I think when it comes to currently, I would love to have more citizen science and diving programs and I guess monitoring programs out and about. Currently, that's not super viable. I think when we look at the uh, when we look at the federal investment for the Great Barrier Reef compared to the Great Southern Reef, Great Barrier Reef gets 99% of the funding and the love from federal government.
Guilty.
Um, and Great Barrier Reef, I'm not saying it doesn't deserve the funding, and absolutely does, right? It's an incredibly important ecosystem. Not trying to diss it. But yeah, we've got incredibly productive fisheries, incredible ecotourism opportunities here along the southern coast. And we're sort of forgotten when it comes to that federal conversation. So I guess, yeah, what you guys can do, stay engaged, maybe write to your local federal MP and give them a kick up the ass and tell them to get their shit together and help us out a little bit, because that'd be really appreciated. Yeah. So.
Awesome. I got one quick question, then we're going to move on to we're just watching the time, and Ron's going to speak as well. But Danny's put a question in the chat. Do you think it'd be beneficial creating a marine protected area for future management of the species, like something more long-term and ongoing? Is that something you see as possible?
So they are protected. It is a marine protected area. From that section of Cuttlefish Coast is that's all under marine park zoning. So from Black Point up to the Green Chair, to get really specific, just next to Stony Point, that's all sanctuary zone. Even though it's a sanctuary zone, there is fishing allowed. There's some shoreline fishing allowed in that area. And from Lucky Bay, which is a bit further south from Whyalla, all the way to Wallaroo, which is on the York Peninsula, that entire area from Lucky Bay to Wallaroo North is cephalopod exclusion zone. So between April and August, there's no fishing for squid, cuttlefish, octopus, anything, right? So there are lots of protections in place. We also have heritage listing for the Cuttlefish Coast now. But that being said, it's we're dealing with a species that migrates, and we're also dealing with these algal blooms, which they don't read maps. They don't stay in one place. They'll go everywhere. So it's I mean, as far as what the best way to manage this is, I don't have the answer for that. It's incredibly complicated, but thankfully there are protections in place, and hopefully there will be more funding and, I guess, broader protections for other species put in place in the future.
Representing government in the room right now. All right, thank you so much, Manny and Brian. Like, everyone can give them a virtual round of applause if you'd like. Thanks so much for joining us, even though you have going off to another event right now. So good luck with that. And I hope good luck for the rest of the research. And we hope to hear, we still have hope. It's important to have some, no?
Yeah, no, appreciate you for listening, and cheers.
All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you. All right, Ron, you're up. I believe you have some slides to share as well. Oh.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you, Manny and Brian. It was really informative. My name is Ron. I'm the owner of Diving Adelaide. We are the largest dive operator in South Australia. In a normal year, we train about 1,000 divers a year. So we get to see quite a broad cross-section of the people that are diving in South Australia, and where those people dive, and what they actually bring, or what actually brings these people into the sport. Manny and Brian have given us a view of Whyalla. So what I'd like to do is zoom out a little bit and talk about what we've been seeing all across South Australia from the perspective of Diving Adelaide, and then give a snapshot of what's been happening to South Australian diving in the last year. My talk will not be as scientific. It will be more broadly about what the year has meant to us, to the community, to the industry, and then we'll finish up with an idea that we've been working on that I think could help us make the industry more resilient in the future. So let me share my screen. Is that working?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Cool. So when I think about what makes recreational diving in South Australia special, there are actually these three pillars you can see on the screen. The first is our leafy sea dragons, which is South Australia's most iconic species. People travel from all over the world to come and see these, specifically for the opportunity to come and dive with these creatures. Number two is our shore diving. We always say that South Australia really is the shore diving capital of Australia. Between our jetties, accessible coastal reefs, quality of marine life that you can see straight from our shore. And this truly is one of Australia's diving gems. And the third is our macro diving. So on the screen, you can see a pajama squid, which lives at Edinburgh Jetty. Edinburgh Jetty is our macro haven. With an extraordinary variety of marine life, and like many, or Brian also said, like lots of endemic species there, and again, right off the shore. So on top of these three pillars, there's the eagle rays of Seacliff Beach. We've got obviously the cuttlefish at Whyalla that they've just spoken about, and then we've got Port Jackson aggregation at Noarlunga every spring. Then there's little events like spider crab migration. So we've got quite some things that are like individually, any one of those would be very special, but together, like they really make what like South Australian diving, what South Australian diving is. Now, if we look at what's happened in a very short amount of time, right now at Rapid Bay, we're no longer finding any leafy sea dragons while diving there. Second Valley, the Bluff, there are other leafy sea dragon sites. We're not seeing any leafy sea dragons there either. Noarlunga, we didn't have the Port Jackson shark aggregation this spring. Seacliff Beach, we're not seeing any rays there at the moment, so they've disappeared. Whyalla obviously doesn't have a lot of cuttlefish. Luckily, there are some eggs and there are some individuals, so hopefully that will be good enough to sustain that population. And now at Rapid Bay, we've also got an exclusion zone, or we've had an exclusion zone for quite a while actually, around the old jetty there, so we're not allowed to dive on that. Our Drossen jetty is currently closed. It's about to reopen, but that was closed for over a year as well with an exclusion zone. Whyalla's got the exclusion zone now, and now it's just been announced that Edinburgh jetty also is going to have an exclusion zone around it, potentially up to 12 months to dive there as well. Well, that's one of our most beautiful sites that we've got. Now, all of these things don't have the same cause, but like some are algae blooms, some are infrastructure. Some may have other causes, but from the perspective of us as or of me as a dive shop owner, but any diver, like the results are the same. The experiences and the places that we as a community and as an industry rely on have now disappeared and can no longer be accessed. So this is sort of where the accumulation of all these things becomes so important, because if one of these things would happen, then we can pivot. That's what we always do. Like, we're very flexible with these sort of things. If a site closes, then we go somewhere else. If an event is delayed, then we do something else. But if two of these things happen, then we may still be able to do that. But now, if every major pillar of South Australian diving gets hit at the same time, then there's really nowhere else left to pivot to. And that's what made this last year so incredibly hard and incredibly devastating, basically, for us as an industry and as a community. So it isn't just one problem, it's just the accumulation of all these different problems together. And then, we're thinking a lot about this. Slides. Sorry, missed that slide. So then what we're thinking about lately is we get these, I don't want to say older divers, but divers that have been diving for 40 years. They come into the shop and they're like, back in the 1980s, we would be diving at Aldinga, and we would be seeing, we saw a school of hammerheads there, and they've got these tall stories. And we listened to that. And then, I wasn't diving in the 1980s yet. I mean, I was a little kid. But there are records and photographs that these guys have that back these stories up, right? So now for us, modern day, I guess South Australian divers hearing about these stories, it's just like a fairy tale. And it makes us wonder, if we're looking at those sort of things now, and we're so far removed from that in nowadays diving nowadays, are we going to become those old divers? Are we going to be those guys standing in the dive shop in 10 years and saying, hey, we used to walk into Rapid Bay and the leafy sea dragons were right there, and the Whyalla cuttlefish were right there off the shore, and the Noarlunga Port Jackson shark, et cetera, they were just there, and at the moment they're not. So it's sort of the baseline seems to be shifting right in front of our eyes, right? So what one generation considers completely normal, can become something the next generation only knows through photographs and like stories. And I really don't want that to become, what South Australian diving is going to become. So when you hear that, then you may think that South Australia has suddenly stopped being this incredible place to dive, and it certainly hasn't. What we've discovered is just now like how vulnerable we are when several of these things go wrong at the same time. So we've had an unprecedented environmental impact with the algae bloom, while all these infrastructure closures have simultaneously taken away access to some of those most important sites. So I'm sure some of these sites will reopen and some wildlife will recover. But I guess the bigger question is like, how do we make the industry better prepared the next time something like this happens? Because if we can solve that problem, then we're not just responding to this crisis, like we're making South Australian diving stronger for the future. So with that in mind, we believe that this is where an inland, like freshwater dive site can make a real difference. So the government has previously looked at this, at the possibility of developing a quarry. It's only about 20 minutes from Adelaide Centre, and we'd love to turn that into a dedicated inland dive facility. Since the government looked at it, it didn't go ahead at the time, and a lot of things have changed since then. Obviously, this algae bloom has happened, but it's changed a lot of things. So it would provide diver training, deep diving, free diving, technical diving, like emergency services, all those sort of things, school programs, research, like there's lots of things possible in that quarry. And yeah, after what we've just experienced in this year, I think like the bigger value is much simpler now, is that like it gives South Australian dive community, our community and our industry somewhere to pivot to. So it gives us a training site that doesn't disappear because the jetty closes. It gives us somewhere dependent to go when a seasonal aggregation doesn't arrive. It gives us somewhere that remains available when a particular part of the coastline is inaccessible. So an all-weather site, like obviously it won't replace the ocean. Like it can never replace Rapid Bay. It can never replace Edithburgh, like leafy sea dragons, cuttlefish, eagle rays, projection sharks. All of those are still going to be very important. But like it helps protect our community and industry that depend on all of these things. So I think we've been asking the wrong question. I don't think we should be asking, why do we as divers need this inland dive site? I think the better question is, why does South Australia need this like inland dive site? Why does our government need this inland dive site? It's because this is no longer just about giving divers somewhere else to dive. It's about tourism, it's about jobs, it's about training, education. It's about giving the industry a reliable base when the ocean, like wildlife or infrastructure, like just temporarily can't. So above all, I guess it's about resilience. And I think the last year has just exposed how vulnerable we've really become as a community. That's it.
That's my cue.
That's your cue.
Yeah, that was great, Ron. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I can see some questions in the chat. I think, Sharon, we might leave yours till the end. But any focus for Ron before he has to run off to his event? And we might save the Pickaninny Ponds one for a second. Okay, here we go. So Kim says, really interesting, especially on our generation of divers potentially becoming the new old storytellers. Have you seen divers in South Australia accepting the current environmental conditions as the new normal? Or do you think that there's still a lot of positivity and hope that the leafy sea dragons and such will return?
Yes, what's really funny is that like the people that learn to dive with us now, like there's still lots of people that learn to dive, and they would go out on dives now and they come back and like we ask them like, oh, how was it? Like we always do. And they're like, it was amazing, it was mind blowing. Like, and we're like, oh, okay. So it's just, that's what I was saying before, like the baseline just seems to be shifting. And like when we learned to dive, we thought that was amazing. And I'm sure these guys that were diving in the 80s were like, oh, nowadays it's a bit average. Whereas Yeah, like we've seen how it was a year ago and how it is now. But now when people learn to dive, they're still like, oh, the diving experience itself, I guess, is still
Mm.
amazing. But yeah, like that marine life baseline seems to have shifted, and hopefully that will come back, of course. But yeah,
Yeah, interesting.
there is a new normal sort of thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And we've got a question from Denny. Have you observed a decline in diving courses altogether?
We have, but it's not as bad as we thought it would be. Like overall, what we see more is that people learn to dive, and because it is not as spectacular, I guess, as it was before, there is a lower uptake of continuing education, so advanced courses and like rescue courses, etc. And also, there's just less people purchasing their gear and actually getting into the sport. Like they get the ticket and then they disappear. Like our numbers are normally quite high of people that go on to do follow-up courses and purchase their gear and actually get into the sport. Like I think a lot higher than in other places maybe, or like other shops maybe. But yeah, nowadays it's dropped a bit because it's just not as good as it was, I guess.
And I guess that's where the numbers don't account for, you might not have had this one person buy a course, but it's like it's not just that course, it's the all the courses they're going to do and all the gear they're going to buy and all the things they're going to do. So it's hard
They
to,
might still do this part, but then that part
yeah,
might disappear, sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And we've got one more, and then we'll let you go to your event. How much support in community, government, etc., is there for opening the quarry site so far?
There
What have
was
you seen?
before. So this was like it was part of an election campaign a while ago. The government did not get in, so then it disappeared for a while. Then there was talk about it for a little bit, and then that disappeared again. And now I guess it's up to us, or like to up to our community and our industry to put this plan forward again as the main plan for the government to pivot to. And I think it'd be something that that would be really good for the government to be seen doing, so they can show that they're actually doing something big for our industry. And it might not actually be that expensive either because the quarry is already there. So it would literally be put roads in and make it accessible, basically.
Yeah, great. I think that is all the questions that we have, unless anything else. Otherwise, we'll let you run off.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing. And yeah, have a great night.
Thanks, Ron.
All right. Cheers.
And next up, we have Professor Bronwyn Galanders from Adelaide University. Did you had slides to share as well?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, perfect. Okay.
I think you just have to stop sharing those before I can share.
Yeah, Ron, if you just want to stop screen sharing for us. Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Now, yeah. Okay, so can you see that picture? Cool, awesome. So hello everybody, and to you from the land of the Kaurna people, and I'd just like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm going to go back to July, August last year, and just focus a little bit on the cuttlefish when they'd pretty much laid their eggs and the algal bloom was tracking up the Gulf. And just to apologise, because we did cover a little bit of what I was going to mention. So at that stage, there were maps of chlorophyll A, and they were verifying some of these through water samples. And what this shows is the Gulf, it's Gulf, and you can see that's the main big Gulf, and you can see it's the differences in chlorophyll A. And so there was some concern for the cuttlefish at that time, which are way up in the northern Spencer Gulf area. I'm not sure if I could use a pointer on this screen, but yeah, they're in the northern part of the Gulf. And so Department for Environment and Water and others held risk assessment workshops around potential options for the eggs at that time. And basically following that assessment, there was a bubble curtain put in place. And that's, you can see the image here of this is the coastline where the cuttlefish aggregate. You can see the bubble curtain that's here in place, ready to protect the eggs that are laid on the underside of the rocks. So the Department for Environment and Water and others acted really quite quickly here. They were able to make the decision at the end of August, and by September, this is from the news article, the bubble curtain's already in place for if the algal bloom got up to that point. So here you can see some of the freshly laid eggs. This is what the bubble curtain was designed to protect, keep the algae out for if the bloom did get there. And these eggs develop over that 3 to 5 month period. You can see some baby cuttlefish in these larger eggs, and they basically hatch out, and they're at the size of about your thumbnail when they hatch. They then, because they're benthic, so they don't, cuttlefish don't have a pelagic larval phase that disperses through the water column. They go to the bottom, and then they're in, basically in Spencer Gulf. You can see here some hatched eggs, so they definitely hatched last year, and I just thank Stefan for allowing me to use this image here as well. So once a certain number had hatched, there was no need for that bubble curtain, so that was obviously removed. But here you can see some images from changes in chlorophyll A in December and again in February, and you can see that the bloom has got to that upper Spencer Gulf region. The area from about Arno Bay across to Wallaroo and upper Spencer Gulf, as Manny mentioned, you're not allowed to take cuttlefish from there. And that area is basically based on some genetic population work that we've done. So we've done some sampling of the population structure of giant Australian cuttlefish from throughout Australia, and noted that there's 5 different populations across the whole range of the cuttlefish. But what's most interesting is that breeding aggregation population in upper Spencer Gulf is restricted to upper Spencer Gulf, and there's very little overlap with the ones from southern Spencer Gulf that also goes around into Gulf of St Vincent. And so what that means is that when something does affect them, it's not like there's a huge distance for cuttlefish to come, or that they don't move huge distances. There's no larval dispersal to replenish. So Manny also showed a figure similar to this, which is straight from the PIRSA website. It's the abundance of the cuttlefish at the breeding aggregation. Let me just, sorry, just moving my, trying to move my one with everybody on it. So you can see here that the numbers have definitely fluctuated through time. The previous lowest period was back in 2013, and they did rebound from there. So I think there is some hope looking at this data, and that we know from some of the work that we've done is that the cuttlefish are not actually on the breeding aggregation the whole 3 months. So the females only spend about 10 days on the breeding aggregation. They basically breed and then die, and the males are there for about 40 days. So these estimates of abundance are actually minimum estimates of abundance, and that then means that there's probably a larger population size than what's indicated here. The other thing I did want to also highlight here is that there's anecdotal evidence from the past that the cuttlefish weren't actually on that breeding aggregation. So if you look back to there's a big jetty that runs out from right near where the cuttlefish breed, and there was an environmental impact survey done back in June of 81, 82, and they recorded seeing no cuttlefish. But by 1986, when they were actually doing more surveys at the site, but based on the pair pilings of the jetties, that's when they were able to video and find cuttlefish that year. So there's evidence back through time that they have potentially fluctuated quite a lot, and they have been able to to rebuild. And you can see that in this figure as well, from the really low numbers of 2013, when there was quite a lot of funding put in to try and understand why the numbers were low. And nothing really jumped out as it was one reason or other. I think about the best thing that they've been able to see is that there's a relationship between the cuttlefish abundance and sea surface temperature anomaly. Sorry, just moving on. So if we move on and have a look at some of the current research that we've just had funded through the Department for Environment and Water, we've got some funding to look at an update of the population model to 2013. And so we'll update our population model, and that can be used to test scenarios. So we can have a look at different scenarios around so how low can the population number actually get and still support the population? But one of the other really interesting things that's been shown is that there's potentially cuttlefish eggs that hatch out, say, back in October, November, and then they come back and breed the following June to August, versus some that come back after more like 18 months, so the following year. So there's evidence from looking at the width of growth increments in the cuttle bones that there are, in fact, multiple year classes in the population, but only the two. So it's not the same individuals coming back multiple times. It's basically some individuals breeding after the first year and some breeding after the 18-month kind of time period. So we're going to take the cuttle bones, similar to what they did with the width of the increments, and we can take stable isotopes of oxygen from within those cuttle bones. And because that's related to temperature, we can potentially look and see whether the patterns suggest they're breeding after 1 year versus 2 years. And you can see in this graph in the bottom right-hand corner, that's sea surface temperature at the Point Lowly location. And again, this is coming from state government report. And so you can see that there's clear variation in temperature that should be reflected in the cuttle bones. So once we have a look at those patterns, we can then determine the proportion of cuttlefish that come after, say, 12 months versus 18 months, and add that into some of the modelling work that we'll be doing. So I think, as Manny also mentioned, one of the key things to remember about the giant Australian cuttlefish is that there is actually no storage effect in the population. So what that means is that they can't just come back if they have an unsuccessful breeding year. They can't just come back and try again. Whereas something like snapper, they live for 30 plus years and they can come back year after year and breed again if they've had a bad year, provided that there's adults still around. So that's something to also bear in mind. So thank you very much. And I will just highlight that this artwork was done as part of a project that was funded through the Commonwealth Government, Finding the Fab Five. It was done by school children, and it's a wonderful image of giant Australian cuttlefish, but also combining some sea country and ecotourism things. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. I love the image. It's so cute. And thank you so much for that presentation. That was extremely, so interesting and informative, although I'll admit my graph reading skills are very slow. But I would encourage, if anyone has questions for Bronwyn, to pop them in the chat at the moment. Otherwise, I have a question for you, Bronwyn, and I'm sorry if I'd misheard it, but it's so interesting how the cuttlefish breeding is linked to sea temperatures. And we know that that's, on average, is rising everywhere. So kind of, do you have an idea of kind of what what it might look like in the future as we go through these ongoing marine heat waves? I know this year, for example, up in Cairns, we're worried about the El Nino event coming, but I'm not quite sure how that affects the Southern Ocean. Is there anything you could say a bit more on that?
Yeah, so where the cuttlefish actually occur is in upper Spencer Gulf. It's actually an inverse estuary, so it's got quite high salinity and temperature to start with. So yeah, you wouldn't want to, we've done some work when there was talk around desalination plants and things that demonstrates you wouldn't want to change the salinity or the temperature too much up there, and you'll start to have an impact on the eggs. And I think the difference with like the adults is that they're highly mobile, highly adaptable, whereas the eggs are stationary, they can't move. So if the temperatures do start increasing, for example, that's when it starts to get problematic.
Yeah, right. And then I guess it links to a question that's just gone in the chat about the adaptability of cuttlefish. So is there any evidence that I don't know if the adult populations are adapting, or because the eggs can't quite adapt that well, is that what's kind of creating this bottleneck for the population?
Yeah, so cuttlefish or cephalopods in general are highly adaptive. So if you get like great growth years or great temperatures that work really well for them, they'll grow fast, they'll breed fast, that sort of thing. Whereas if you've got poor years, you'll get smaller individuals. And you see that really clearly over in one of the populations in Peru, where the squid can get absolutely massive when it's a really good year, like human size, and then in bad years they'll be half that size. Yeah, so they really do adapt very well, highly adaptable cuttlefish. They're also like obviously grow fast, but have short lifespans.
Yeah, I love cuttlefish, but I don't know how I'd feel with a human-sized one. That'd be a fascinating dive.
Well, the other thing is that the cuttlefish on the east coast are much bigger. They're the same species, but they're much bigger than the ones that you get up in Whyalla, because I was thinking when I first went diving at Whyalla that they would be the size of the ones that I'd seen around Botany Bay and Sydney, but they're a fraction of the size.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, the ones in Sydney I think are a bit more scary than the ones in Whyalla.
We've got one last question for you. Do we know whether any other marine species compete with the cuttlefish within this breeding zone?
So usually if you're diving there, you don't actually see a lot of other species. Like there's a few fish and that sort of thing, but there's not. I have heard that this year there's lots of snapper there, but other years when I've been diving, it's mainly just the cuttlefish. There's dolphins there that feed on the dead and dying cuttlefish, so there's potentially trophic impacts of not having cuttlefish there. But yeah, and they're the main, but you don't really see anything that's there that would be so-called competing.
Yeah. So there is one more question. I lied. This is the last one from Kwan. How strongly does the estimated number, the breeding cuttlefish of 1 year, predict the next season, and how much the temperatures influence this? Then he's got a bit of a question about, is there any kind of other artificial structures, I guess, like the bubble curtain, like that can protect against heat waves?
Yeah, so just in relation to his first question, you saw that the numbers are highly variable. So, like, they can get quite low and then you see them increase again over time. And when we did some work back around 2013, it must have been when the numbers got really low, we were looking to try and see whether other populations of cephalopods showed a cyclical pattern that might suggest that that's what was happening with the Whyalla ones. But what we found is that, in fact, over time, most cephalopod populations around the world have increased, and it's likely linked to temperature, among other variables. What was this next question? I'm just having a look. Artificial structures. So cuttlefish do lay eggs on artificial structures. Like, so I think over at Kabawi there on the jetty, there was some corrugated iron thrown into the sea at one stage, and they laid the eggs there. When the numbers got really low, Sadi did some research looking at whether they would lay on artificial structures, but they didn't at that stage. I'm not sure whether it's linked to how much habitat might be available. If there's loads of habitat available, then you don't like natural habitat, then you don't need to use artificial habitat. So they have looked at that, and there's any artificial structures. I guess one of the things that people consider is whether you get them laying on artificial structures that would then allow you to move them elsewhere. But again, yeah, not so sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's everything for now. Thank you so much for joining us, Bronwyn, on your Thursday afternoon. That was really interesting. I'm sure everyone can give a virtual round of applause. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. And then we've got one more speaker, everyone. So thank you for everyone who stayed on. We're staying on strong, everyone. Fantastic. We've kind of covered a lot of topics. We've gone from scientific and citizen science kind of views of Whyalla. We've gone from diving and climate resilience and adaptation of an industry. And now we're going to turn a bit to the policy side of things and what has been happening in that space since the algal bloom has started. And so with that, I'd love for Kirsty Bevan to turn her mic on and take the stage. Kirsty?
Thanks, Yolanda. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, great. I've got my headphones on because I'm in a shared space because I'm also running to another event. It's the week of it here with Adelaide Climate Action Week. I didn't bring slides, so I do apologize to everybody. But I will start by just acknowledging that I'm joining you from Ghana country and just acknowledge really that strong connection with the Ghana to their sea country as well. I guess from a Conservation Council perspective, it's probably good to just highlight that we're the peak body for conservation in SA. So we play a pretty critical role in trying to make sure that there is a very loud community voice for nature and the environment. Now, a couple of ways we've done that with the algal bloom is I've engaged with all my constituents and then actually written into both the state and the federal Senate inquiry. And I guess primarily the biggest push we've been asking for is for that large-scale monitoring program to be established along our coastline because we're missing that baseline information. In addition to that, we've also been calling for a separate packet of money to be set aside federally to deal with these kind of ocean crises that come as a result of climate impacts. And we did hear both Brian and Maddie mention a couple of things about, the warming surface water temperatures. All the reports have said that this is a normal anomaly, but what happened was that this lasted longer than normal and was higher on average than it normally is, so 2.5 degrees higher, which if we saw that on terrestrial land we'd be in uproars. But we had a 2.5 to 3 degree warming of those surface water temperatures, and no action took place. So what I argued for was an addition to the recording of that information, some registered body, whether it's federal government, state institutions, have the core responsibility for actually looking and checking that data to see when there are spikes in warmth as temperatures, as well as higher levels of nutrients and those kind of conditions that lead to things like algal blooms. So that was one of them. The other thing was to really push for, a separate bucket of money, because what we found with the algal bloom resulting here in South Australia was, rightfully so, we talked about the impacts to commercial fisheries, we talked about the impacts to businesses and community, businesses along the coastline. And majority of the money went to research of the algal bloom or the algal species, rightfully so, and people, rightfully so. But what happens was the ecology and the ecosystem resilience bit just was at the sort of bottom end of that conversation and therefore didn't get what was required in terms of the funding. Some of the really big things that came out of the federal review was that there was recommendations for a new national framework to respond to climate-induced ecological events, which I think is really, really important. And then the state government and the federal government combined put in somewhere around $160 million towards responding to the algal bloom. And it's good to remember that number because, it is a big chunk of money. And something we hadn't quite prepared for. So it did get, a lot of traction. The 160 million shouldn't be balked at. This went primarily to science, research, businesses, and a little bit in terms of environmental recovery. A large proportion of it, about 100 million, went to their summer plan, and the 20 million of that went specifically to the large-scale native oyster reef, community shellfish reef. That's where they use old oyster shells in order to build a shellfish reef. A bit of seagrass and blue carbon work, and a breeding program, which was with Zoos SA, which was primarily leafy sea dragons, which is proving quite successful. And that was through some advocacy, through some international groups and alliances that led to that. The rest of the money really is going towards some really important stuff, but it's water monitoring and forecasting, so we can do early detection of future blooms. Some offshore water analysis, which is really trying to look at how water moves between the foreshore and offshore, so that we can look at how the movement of the bloom has taken place, because in South Australia we have a lot of bays, which meant that it was sticking longer than we had expected. There's been a whole lot of money that's gone to an absolutely new office site for science, which is looking at how the algal species actually grows and forms, and its biology. There's been a little bit of money towards these AI cytobots, which is really that phytoplankton detection of early bloom. So again, another part of that detection. And then there's a little bit of money that's gone towards potential mitigation techniques. So this is if we saw another uprise of a bloom, could we use things like clay or gyroid absorbent sponge, things like that, in order to see if there's a chance to mitigate it with early detection. The rest went to businesses and community, which was really needed. But I guess in that whole package of money, there was nothing for future ecological impacts. And we know that massive amounts of impact was taken in that sort of trophic picture of, whole swathes of fish and different species being washed up on shore. What we didn't actually think about, or the government didn't think about, was what the long-term implications of that were going to be. So we won't likely see the full impacts of the bloom for another 4 to 5 years, but unfortunately there wasn't any money put towards that long-term monitoring or research. Through a lot of pressure from community groups as well as the Cons Council, the government did agree to create what's called the Algal Bloom Recovery and Resilience Plan. And an entire new group was formed called the Algal Bloom Response Coordination Unit. That's within Premier and Cabinet of Government. And they've hired an external group called UPRS or URPS to develop that particular plan. I guess what we know is that huge stretches of our coastline have little to no baseline data. We know existing effects are pretty piecemeal and heavily focused on fisheries and commercial stock or water quality and not on ecosystem health. And we know what we really need is a comprehensive statewide, or at least a Great Southern Reef-wide, marine monitoring program. One of the things we've been calling for is that monitoring program to actually cover 4 key areas. So it's not just the government long-standing programs like the BRUVs, the Beta Remote Underwater Video Surveillance. It's also about research and innovation at the uni sort of sense. So we get uni researchers out there actually looking at how the ecosystem is responding. Citizen science, and that investment is really critically important, because one of the biggest things that happened with the algal bloom was government surveying is really expensive, and it was the citizen science piece that happened of people actually going out and recording the data that filled the gaps that the government couldn't do. And then the other one is around traditional owner monitoring and recovery. I think we also know, and for all the other South Australians online here, we know that it's not gone away. It's still here. And whilst it was first detected in March of 2025, and we were worried we were going to get another spike in March of 2026. We didn't. It doesn't mean that we won't see another spike coming up. I guess there's some really big things ahead, and I'd really love to finish with something around what people can do, because I do think there is hope. I don't know if anyone got to see that wonderful David Attenborough Oceans film, but there was a really good example in there that if we just get out and leave the ocean to recover, it actually recovers fairly well and fairly quickly in comparison to terrestrial environments. So I do think that we missed an opportunity with this algal bloom to advocate for stronger marine protected areas. It would have been the one time where we would have not had much opposition, particularly from those lobby groups on the fishing side, and we probably could have got some greater marine protected areas. But I guess for the future, we do still have our petition up on our website, which is really where people can sign up to say, have their say. And then I think there's another opportunity coming up with the federal marine park review. So there is majority of marine parks in Australia's federal waters are about to go through their 10-year statutory review. There is a really unique opportunity, I think, to improve marine sanctuaries through that process, and there'll be loads of opportunities for people to reflect on the algal bloom and the impact that that's had to push for greater marine protection. And we have a great opportunity coming up here within Conservation SA, where we've been a big long-standing partner of Save Our Marine Life Alliance. And we've actually got a new position that we'll be recruiting for in the next couple of weeks in partnership with the Save Our Marine Life Alliance to recruit a new marine campaigner here in South Australia, which will hopefully really bring community together and show some opportunities where we can voice for greater ecological outcomes, particularly within the marine environment. But that's it for me. I'm happy to take questions if anyone's got some. I saw some popping up.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Kirsty. That was great. We've got one from Kim that addresses some policy stuff, and then I saw a few others earlier that might be better for Bronwyn. There's some science ones in there, but anyone can answer. First one, what do you think the policy response to the algal bloom, both in SA and at a federal level, tells us about how well prepared we are for climate change, particularly slow onset marine climate impacts?
Oh, we're not prepared. So not prepared. And you would think that something like this would spur us on. And it doesn't mean that from a state or federal government, the people in power aren't aware. They are. It's the machinery of government, which is just so incredibly slow. I think we've got probably some really cool stuff coming up where we will have opportunities to raise it again and push it, because ultimately, both at a federal and state sense, these people are 100% employed by us. We vote them in and they are led by community voices. So if there is enough pressure, we will be able to get them to respond in a much faster way. But yeah, things like review of the federal marine parks will give us also another opportunity to voice for better outcomes. But yeah, we are not prepared.
And we've got one from Sue. Realistically, what value apart from scientific data is there in early identification of a bloom arising? Well,
I think we haven't cracked it yet. I've got a 12-year-old and I'm constantly working on the growth mindset. So every time he says I can't do something, I respond with yet. So I think we haven't cracked it yet in terms of how we could at scale respond to an algal bloom. Sorry, while I'm talking, I'm going to plug my computer in so it doesn't run out of battery whilst I'm talking. So yes, I do think that early detection and sorry, Sarah. I'm just going to try and plug my computer in before it dies.
That's okay.
Okay, I'm good. So yeah, I think I think they've tested some things, and we're not alone in algal blooms in South Australia. I think we're the first in Australia, and we're the first at scale of this particular species. But in terms of algal blooms, they've occurred in Japan, they've occurred in the US, and there's lots of, I guess, examples of how they've tried to respond to controlling it, or at least preventing it from spreading as quickly as it does. And I think this is one of the wonderful things about the amount of funding that has gone to at least PIRSA in terms of understanding how species move in the water, how they grow, what's their biology like, which will lead to innovative and new approaches to how we can mitigate it. But yeah, we're not quite there yet.
Thank you. We've got one more here that I think you'll be able to answer. The varied causes of the algal bloom listed in the government's recent report, floodwater, marine heatwave, coastal upwelling, are all impacted. Oh, it's disappeared. All impacted or worsened by climate change. What responsibility do you think South Australia has in addressing fossil fuels as a major driver of climate change? And I think that question kind of answers one that was before, which was just broadly asking what caused the algal bloom.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is my soapbox. So do pull me up if I go too hard. Because absolutely, it is climate change is 100% driven. Well, the climate change we're talking about, and that is the evidence and the science talks to, is driven by human interactions. So the large proportion of that climate drivers come from our use of fossil fuels. Now, I also am a realist, and I know that our very existence on this planet interacts with the production of goods and services which come from the burning of fossil fuels. So we can't turn that off instantly. But we should acknowledge that these are big polluters, and those big polluters are accelerating climate change, right? And therefore, we should get them, because they're making big profits, to at least go towards some kind of response, whether that's resilience or mitigation or whatever it is, when we're getting climate disasters like this algal bloom. And this is why we're running a massive big partnership with some other groups around Make Polluters Play.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions? I was going to save the Bronwyn, did you want to, I was saving this one for you, but feel free to skip out if you want. But just about the causes, the broader causes of the algal bloom. I think Kirsty touched on that, but just if you wanted to add anything. Otherwise, if anyone else wants to drop any final questions in the chat for either speaker. Bronwyn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, you don't have to answer. Up to you if you wanted to add to anything there.
Yeah, just I haven't actually had a chance to read that government report yet as to the causes of the algal bloom, but almost certainly upwelling and temperature changes. I'm a little bit more skeptical about whether River Murray water would impact things, I have to admit, and I think a lot of people are.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, that's sweet. Emily's put a lovely question. Oh, we've got.
No, I did see that. That's a gorgeous question.
I'll save that one
that.
because that's a nice one to end on, Emily. But Alex just asked, she's keen to hear why you're skeptical about the River Murray impact, which I think this is an interesting one because this has come up a few times when people have talked about it. And I personally thought that it got off the table early on, but now it seems to be back. So yeah, I'd love to hear.
Do you want me to answer that? It happened a few years ago, and it just assumes that there's something just sitting there waiting. I'd like to see more evidence, I guess, that that's definitely one of the factors.
I can actually add a little bit more. I'm in the same boat, shall I say, as Bronwyn, in that we think the timing of that and the speed and the scale at which those waters traveled through the system. In fact, we had expected more of that water to stay within the system and to water the wetlands, but it didn't. So the ecological results of that flood experience weren't as positive as we thought they were going to be because it moved through so quickly. So it is really, I guess the scientists that I've talked to have said it's highly unlikely that the nutrient load from that would have lasted that length of time. However, both that surface water temperature, which was above average, like I said, 2.5 degrees for a longer period of time, and the upwelling, which again is a completely natural system, but it brought with us much more nutrients than is normal. And both of those events, there is endless research papers that talk about these events becoming much more extreme, much more often, and lasting for much longer based on an accelerated climate change.
It was kind of the perfect cocktail, wasn't it? Okay, last question. You can both answer it if you want, up to you. It's a very sweet question. If you had a magic wand for change, what would you guys wish for?
I'll let Kirsty answer that.
Oh, I love this question. Surely you wish you had a magic wand. I guess I would actually ask for the full implementation of our marine parks no-take zones, which I think is the most important, because our marine parks no-take zones are in some of the most biodiverse and most important marine biodiversity areas where breeding takes place, and what I think some of the lobby groups that have pushed against those marine park no-take zones because it's the best places to fish, but they're not understanding, I guess, that long term. We're trying to go for the long-term survival. And if we keep those breeding spaces free from threats, then those fish will move and you will still get your great fishing spots, and we won't damage the long-term sustainability. So absolutely, I'd wave my wand and I would remove all those lobby groups and I'd create extensive amounts of no-take zones to protect our marine systems. I'd also stop bottom trawling.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a good answer. Yolanda, did you want to wrap up, or do we have any final questions? If not, I think what time? It's pretty much 7 o'clock here in Sydney.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kirsty and Bronwyn. And thanks, Emily, for the question. That's such a lovely way to end, I think. Yeah, that's everything from us today. Thank you so much to everyone who attended and who sat with us for an hour and a half after what I'm sure is a long week, especially those currently in Adelaide doing Climate Week in person. Wish we were there. Yeah, just wanted to thank you all for coming. I hope you learned something. If you have questions for us at Divers for Climate, please feel free to email us if you'd like to see more of these events and just updates from what's happening on the ground around Australia, especially as we come back into summer again. Please do let us know, because this is what we hope to help do. We are currently preparing for summer. We have a couple of fact sheets on our website and free resources for download if anyone's interested about the El Nino event coming, also about how to predict marine heat waves and what climate risk means if you're a diver. They're all made for divers, so please do feel free to download them. And that is everything from us. Yeah, really, really grateful that you all came, and thanks again to all the speakers, and thanks to Sarah and Kim for helping moderate the session. Hope everyone has a great Friday/weekend.
Sorry, do you go straight up Brighton Road? Just keep going all the way up? Oh, perfect. No worries. It's a 680, which I know, but if this just goes straight.
I completely missed that. Was your question answered?
No, it was accidental mic.
Oh, okay.
Unmute, I think.
Awesome. All right. Have a good evening, everyone. Okay.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
I think it stops recording. I'm going to stop.